Hello, this is Frank Norris, and to my left is my very good friend Stan Johnson, and we make up the Frank and Stan weekly chats. So good morning, Stan.
Good morning, Frank.
Yes, how are you?
Cold.
Cold, in the cricket pavilion again.
Yeah, but it's so dark here, I've had to have the doors open, so I'm drinking coffee and trying to stay warm. It is July after all.
Yeah.
So.
And beneath us we have Jenny Webb. Jenny, thank you for joining us. Can you just say a little bit about who you are and perhaps why you're here?
Okay, so I'm an English teacher by trade, and I work at an amazing school in the centre of Leeds, big, diverse, comprehensive school. I'm an assistant head teacher, so I lead on teaching and learning, and that's kind of my biggest passion, really. I love pedagogy and research and theory and kind of how those things can all be manipulated and used in the best possible way to improve the lives of students. I feel very, very passionately about comprehensive education and about inclusion. I have written a couple of books for English teachers, which have done quite well. So
one has just been published, hasn't it?
Yeah, one came out the week after my son was born. So it was a very interesting process this time round. So yeah, I feel like I had two babies this year. So yeah, I wrote one last year on teaching English literature, but with a focus on cultural capital and children who are essentially at a disadvantage compared to children who have had the benefits of lots and lots of reading and lots of exposure to cultural experiences, that kind of thing. And the one this year is all about teaching writing, and I've collaborated with a series of really phenomenal professional writers from a whole range of different disciplines. So I've had a fantastic playwright called Zodwa Nyoni, who's Zimbabwean, and I've had Dame Estelle Morris contributing as a speech writing specialist, which was amazing. I've had lots of really cool people, so that's been a really great book. For me, it's been a really good experience. It's felt quite important. And in the current climate, actually, lots of things that we worked on for that book, there were lots of, I was thinking a lot about power and dynamic when it comes to things like groups of people who traditionally had more power than all, and how that kind of plays out in the English classroom. So that's been a really interesting project. Yeah, and I'm on maternity leave, so I'm free as a kid at the moment and having quite a nice time.
That's great. I mean, the signal's breaking up a little bit, isn't it, Stan? Is it your end as well?
Oh, sorry.
I think it's
That's
just
right,
the microphone picking up the first time.
Oh, right, okay. So
the automatic
we got the gist of it. I mean, I think I've probably known you for about 4 or 5 years, I think. And I think I read your first book and felt that because it came at a time when there was quite a lot around cultural capital. I think it became a phrase that featured something. I'm interested as the point that you make in the book is that the lack of cultural capital is not a reason for having lower standards. I mean, I think that's the thing that comes through very strongly. I mean, why do you think it is, though, that there is just that sort of inability of some teachers to actually get that, as if to say there is a sort of complicitness to, in some cases, not all, but some.
I think, so without wanting to make blanket statements about my colleagues in the profession, it's very easy to fall into a pattern, a way of thinking about certain students and to expect certain things from certain types of students. And when we expect those things tend to come to pass, and so we get this confirmation bias all the time. So, I knew so-and-so wouldn't do very well, and they didn't do very well, and therefore, now that I know this other student isn't going to do very well, that will also happen, and that's out of my control. And we kind of have to break that cycle, because if we suddenly go, so-and-so might have this situation going on, but actually, if I do this, and this with them, they probably will do really well. And it takes a long... I think it's difficult to face your own bias sometimes as a teacher. Like, one of the kind of biggest pieces of work I did when I first came to my current school with our wonderful staff, they are wonderful, but one of the biggest hurdles was getting over this. You know, I essentially had to stand in front of them once and just say, look, you need to get over yourselves, because what you're thinking is not appropriate right now. We need to think about these children in a different way. And we had to do quite a lot of work to kind of get people to recognize what those kids are actually capable of. And I think it's, once we accept that our expectations of them aren't high enough, once we take a bit of a leap of faith and start pushing them, they really surprise us, and it happens really, really quickly, I think. I always use my own example, because actually I come from a, you know, single parent, ethnic minority, really, really poor background. We had nothing, but my mum is an incredibly highly educated woman. Like, she didn't go to sixth form, but then she sat the entrance exam for university after my sister was born. So, you know, she went to school went to university and read history. She's very, very, very intelligent. We always had books in the house. The woman can recite Henry V from memory, you know, and she grew up in Seacroft, you know, in the only black family on the entire estate. The woman is an absolute kind of prodigy. My mum, she's a genius, but she never had those opportunities. If she'd been born 20 years later, she might have gone on and been able to do something. But actually, if you'd looked at me on paper at school, you wouldn't have expected very much. But if, you know, the fact that actually, I think it's about recognizing that disadvantage and poor kids doesn't mean the same thing everywhere. There are 100,000 different types of disadvantaged child, and there's also, you know, and it's intersectional. So there are some children who have affluent parents who have a disability, and therefore they don't necessarily benefit from all of the things that an affluent middle class child might do. There are so many things that make things more complicated than just, oh, you're pupil premium and therefore you're probably not going to have gone to the theatre. Because one thing we definitely spent money on it when I was a kid was going to the theatre. That's all we ever really did, going to the theatre and reading books, you know. And I think it's really important that we open ourselves up a little bit and recognise that one person's poor is not another person's poor. Yeah.
I went to prize giving at, because the school you're at is at Coop Academy Leeds, a school that I've always had probably to a fault, had a soft spot for. But actually, I remember going to a prize giving evening at, I'm trying to remember, it was Northern Ballet. it was held at, I think, at their studios nearby.
Yeah. And
we were congregating with the parents afterwards, and just trying to emphasize here the bias, that actually I was talking to a parent, and he was just very proud of what his son had achieved at the academy. And I just said to him, and what do you do? And we must bear in mind, this is in a very challenging community, isn't it? Economically, socially challenging community.
Yeah.
And he said, well, I'm a senior lecturer in sort of social policy at Leeds University. And I thought, oh, really? And it really made me think about, you know, when you're in that sort of community, your first impression is one of, well, it's going to be if you are in work, to be a manual labour job. It's going to probably be one where you're probably flitted from one place to another. Completely shocked me, you know. And I suppose in a way, opening out to your own prejudices is yeah, I found it quite painful. You know, reflecting on the drive home.
I think the other thing, Frank, that you have to take into consideration, this goes back to me teaching in this inner city Salford, was you can raise the children's expectations, but the impact of their peer group and their families and the context in which they live has an influence. Because I can remember trying to get one of the girls who would be 10, 11 to push for a grammar school place because she was brilliant at maths. And then when I spoke to her parents, they said she wants to be a nanny and that's what she'll do. And it was like, yeah, but she really is a talented mathematician. Yeah, well, you know, round here that counts for nothing kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's really disheartening if you can't. So, I mean, I do think there is a solution, but it's wider than the school. And you and I both know when we did inspections, teachers' expectation was top of the list as to what made a difference.
Absolutely.
Everything else was second.
You know, there's a really interesting kind of, there's this constant rumbling conversation going on teacher social media about differentiation versus mastery versus kind of all these different things. And we try and, for some reason, people try and boil it down to this traditional versus prog kind of debate, which is completely unnecessary because, like, who said we had to be binary in this world? I think it's all a big grey area. And actually, for me, teaching to the top and having really, 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 really high expectations, and not just high expectations for, oh, I think you could be a doctor, but kind of, no, I expect that by the end of this lesson you can achieve this thing. this is what I expect you to do. And if you don't get there, we're going to have a problem, because that's the standard in my classroom. Like that kind of, I kind of call it like this relentless, fierce love, and I think that that's what my mum gave us, this idea that this is where I expect you to be because I know you can do it, and because I love you and I want you to do really well. I want you to succeed beyond this classroom, and if you don't therefore do X, Y and Z in my classroom, then I am going to have you over break, or I am going to do this because that's how much I love you. I'm going to give up my lunch break for you because you're being like, you're not doing the things you need to do. And I think that like teachers need to be able to embrace this idea that their students can do a lot more than perhaps they think they can, but also, like you said, Stan, we need to make it more than the school. The school has to be the centre of the community, and that's one of the reasons I love working for the Co-op so much. It's this idea that we should be reaching out and bringing that community in. You know, we should be the hub, and it's a huge piece of work. And you know, in a community like ours, I grew up where Co-op Leeds is, so I am one of those kids. Like my mum still lives 5 minutes away from the school, so it's understanding that community and the enormous complexity of that community, because it's basically, if you know Leeds, it's where all the immigrant populations have historically settled first. So we have lots and lots of asylum seekers and refugees. We've got more recently kind of Roma Gypsy population coming in, but we've had historically, my family are there because we're Caribbean, you know, and there's this whole kind of range of groups of people who have come in, and kind of everyone's living in quite difficult circumstances because it's not an area that attracts a lot of funding, funnily enough.
I've got to throw this in, Jenny, because I
know what you're going to say, Frank.
I live in Cheadle. I tell you, you know, I feel privileged to live here. We nearly, as a family, we probably nearly went bust trying to get into this area, because I was born in the south. I came to the north. My first teaching job was in Cheadle, and I thought, wow, this is amazing. I always dreamt of being able to own a house or to live in the area, so we did, and we've been very happy. Well, the government announced this week that Cheadle is going to get £25 million as part of the Levelling Up funding to support poor northern communities. And it's an absolute disgrace. And the reason why this is happening is because this is a marginal. So the Tories just, on the last two elections, just crept over the line, despite the Lib Dems putting every shoulder to the machine. And actually, I think it's an absolute disgrace, you know. But I tweeted about this and said that you know, I assume that if Cheadle got 25 million, then Hare Hills must have got trillions. ... And this guy from Hare Hills said, "Yeah, we're all driving around in our Lamborghinis now, and all the potholes are all filled in." So you know, and it was just nice that it. And I think that for me, the reason I'm getting to now is the context in which you work. Understanding that context is, I think, quite important, because a place like Hare Hills, there are roads where actually only Gypsy Roma families live. There are roads where Polish families live. You know, to give a sense that it's all jumbled up, mixed up. There is some of that, but actually there is also very clear demarcation and some traditions within these communities, which I think you really do have to have an understanding of. Which, of course, you will.
Yeah. It's true, and actually I have a really, really good friend called Sajju Ahmed, who is a Bangladeshi guy that I grew up with. He lives in Hare Hills, and I grew up right on the edge of Hare Hills and Chapeltown. So Chapeltown is one of the other areas that our students come from, and kind of, you know, a lot of people in Leeds are scared of even stopping at the traffic lights in Chapeltown because of this utterly ridiculous rumour, which is just, I mean, it's not, Chapeltown is a beautiful place to live. It's like the artistic hub of the city. It's amazing, very bohemian and cultured. But my friend Saj is a phenomenal writer, and I've had him in to talk to the kids, and one of the things he always says to them is he says, right, put your hand up and tell me who the most intelligent person in this room is. And generally they'll put their hand up and they'll say it's you or it's their teacher. What he says to them is, you're wrong. Can your teacher tell you where not to walk at night in Chapeltown? Can your teacher tell you which corner to avoid on a Saturday morning because there's a drug happening? Because all the kids know that stuff. You know, it's this idea of what intelligence is and what cultural knowledge is and what a community is. And I think that, you know, from so my mum is half Caribbean, so I'm only a quarter Caribbean, and I can very easily pass for white, which is a very difficult thing to deal with when you're younger. I've got my head around how that works now, but it's a difficult situation to not look Caribbean but to feel very Caribbean. And my husband is from Chapel Allerton, which is a posh bit north of where I grew up, and he had to walk. We've been together since we were 16, and he had to walk through my community to get home, and he was like this posh white boy essentially. And everyone in my area knew me because they knew my mum, because she's really, really kind of big part of the community, and everyone knows me. But he had to walk a very particular route home if he was by himself, because there were some roads where he really shouldn't be going, certainly not after dark. And it's not because people are bad or wicked in that area, it's because people are hurting and people have suffered a lot of really appalling neglect, basically, and they don't trust certain groups in society. And it's a really, really, you know, it's a really difficult thing. And I think that one of the most amazing and most telling things about Chapeltown and where our school is situated is that at the moment, through all the Black Lives Matters resurgence, is that there hasn't been a race riot in Chapeltown. There wasn't even a race riot in Leeds when all the London riots happened, and it spread around the country. The Chapeltown elders, so the West Indian elders who settled here in the 50s and 60s, one of whom is my grandfather, had a meeting and organised a march for peace, and they just had a silent walk through the centre of Leeds, you know. And it's all about kind of looking after the younger generation and making sure they have the right ways and tools of approaching things, you know. But it's at the moment, you know, they're hosting these amazing art installations basically in the city centre, and it's all coming from Chapeltown. It's all coming from that community where our students are from.
So when you talk like that, it moves us into the suitability of the curriculum, doesn't it? Because then I know that, I mean, looking at the photo behind, was it on your left-hand side on the wall?
It's Mr. Darcy.
That's a text that I would have read as a student doing my O-levels. But actually, I think some of your interest is it's about the suitability and the interest and excitement of a curriculum, and whether or not what we have at the moment is actually a little bit too monocultural, and actually whether it needs, you know, to actually sort of broaden out so that this is a curriculum of the world as opposed to a curriculum around. You know?
Yeah. So I think this is a really, really complex debate at the moment, because it's been, a lot of people are being quite reductive about it. So my argument is that in order to have, so all I really want, my main aim in life as an English teacher is to teach the best stuff. I don't really care who wrote it, and I don't care when it was written. I want to teach the best stuff. So I want to expose my students to the best literature, the best language, the most interesting explorations of the human condition through word. And that's why I love my subject. However, because literature and the canon, so the list of acceptable texts that we teach and writers that we teach, has been so long dominated by kind of white men, basically, and so women have been excluded, all traces of kind of queer writing pretty much excluded, very much, and obviously people of colour excluded or never given the opportunity to be writers in the first place. It means that we're not necessarily showing our students the best, we're limiting them. And so I am not arguing for just taking Dickens off the curriculum or taking Shakespeare off the curriculum, not at all. I'm arguing for English teachers and people with the power to change things to read more stuff and then make an informed decision. So, you know, Of Mice and Men is an excellent novel. I think Steinbeck is a phenomenal writer. But I also know that if you've only, so some English departments put Of Mice and Men on the curriculum because they think that that's ticking a box for diversity, but it's not. That's a white man writing about a woman and a white man writing about a black man. And if the only black character that students encounter over their entire career at school is Crooks in Of Mice and Men, who, if you don't know, is a disabled farmhand living by himself on the ranch, and he's utterly miserable, and his name is Crooks, you know, to describe his kind of bent back. And it's just so, he's a fascinating character. But that's, you know, if we want to encounter black characters and the black experience in literature, we need to hear black voices talking about it, and it needs a bit more nuance than, here's a black man called Crooks, or here's a woman who doesn't even have a name. You know, it's a really, it's a problematic text. And I'm not saying stop reading it, I'm saying read it and teach it with a little bit of critical intelligence, and have that conversation with your students. Maybe teach it and bring in some non-fiction to enhance people's understanding. There are lots of really great writers that have written things about that text, or have written things in response to it, you know, and there's so much we can do. It's not about tearing things up, because I love Shakespeare. Shakespeare is a genius. I'm not a mad fan of Dickens, but I understand why we teach Dickens, you know. It's about making sure, you know, there's a very, very prominent and very vocal head teacher in London who, you know, has written in the tests and written about saving white men on the curriculum and stuff. No one's saying get rid of them. We're saying let's open up to the field of opportunity, because there are so many phenomenal writers out there who we're just ignoring for no reason, you know. And if you look at your set text and you go, actually, do you know what? I don't think Oliver Twist is as good as this novel by Chinua Achebe, so just swap them out. That's fine. If you're making that decision based on literary merit, do it. Don't just do it because you want to tick a box. You want to say, we got a black curriculum. They do. There are so many phenomenal people out there writing books right now, and it's just a shame.
Say that there was. I was in a dilemma the other day, because there was an MP, and I can't remember which one it was. I'm sorry, who was advocating that we relook at the curriculum to look again at the history curriculum particularly. And I thought the things she was suggesting were great, but it worried me that a member of parliament was suggesting that the government once again dictate, you know, what's in that history curriculum, because that means that changes of government, changes of, you know, more radical governments, and what children learn about their own country and their own history could be really frightening. That amount of power. So while I was agreeing with all the things she said about what should be in the history curriculum, I wanted to say, but give it to people who know how to deliver that and know what's important.
I totally agree with you. I think they just need to back off and leave us alone. All governments, they just need, education shouldn't be dictated like by people who haven't got a clue what they're talking about. It's just utterly ridiculous, and we see it all the time. But I think when it comes to the history curriculum in particular, you know, history teachers are really frustrated at the moment because they have been making a lot of changes. They really have. There are some phenomenal people out there who are being very, very vocal and sharing some amazing things, and looking at, you know, there's some wonderful books that have been published recently that have a different way of looking. You know, if you look at something like Hallie Rubinold's book, The Five, about the 5 canonical victims of Jack the Ripper, and it's a book which is finally talking about these women and their lives rather than this evil man, you know, and fetishizing the death of women. We're actually focusing on the experiences of women, you know, and this kind of, it's really about shifting your focus and shifting your lens, I think. And this is the same goes for literature. But, you know, if you look at someone like Rachel Ball, who's at Walkden Co-op, another co-op school, she's a historian, and she is absolutely blindingly good. And what she's been doing with their curriculum in history is amazing. You know, they're so much more inclusive, and it's not about tearing it up. It's not about changing everything. It's about saying, we teach this at the moment. Is there any scope for looking at the lens that we're looking at it through? Can we introduce other viewpoints, and how can we train our staff to help them have these critical conversations? Because if we don't teach children to look at something problematic, understand why it might be problematic, and criticize it somehow, they need to be able to interrogate things. if we're not teaching them how to do that, then, you know, the Tories get in again because they manage to hoodwink everyone because they don't know how to critically read. You know, that's why we get lumbered with these idiots in government all the time, because the population don't know how to read critically. They can't go, oh, wait a second, they just said that, but that's actually a lie. They can't see that because they're not being taught.
My favourite came out again with the Russian report this week about there being no evidence. But this time they've added another weasel word so that there's no evidence of successful, whatever the phrase they use. But there's 2 weasel words there. One, well, no evidence means you haven't looked. So that's not saying it doesn't exist. And successful, whether you could judge whether somebody's interfered successfully with an election or not, would be very difficult.
Yeah. And that's the point. You know, I delivered some CPD for English teachers last week on grammar, and grammar's really important, politically important. And the addition of successful, the addition of an adjective in that sentence, it opens the whole thing up again. It's so important that we teach our students that stuff really well, because otherwise they get hoodwinked. They get, you know, they just take for granted what people in authority say, and they don't question what they're being told. You know, I had a conversation with somebody a few weeks ago that, you know, should have been a conversation where I was able to trust everything that person said. And afterwards I thought, let's just re-examine the wording that I've just experienced there, because I'm not sure if I can trust that person because of the way they said this and the way they said that. And that's really important. And people, it's why teaching English is so absolutely vital, like teaching it really well.
I think that's a good place to stop.
Sorry, like,
No. I also, because I think it's so refreshing. I don't know how you feel, Stan. It's been an absolute pleasure to spend half an hour with you, Jenny. I often think when I see, you know, people like yourself, when they walk into a classroom of students they've never met before, I think there's something about the passion you have for your subject and the honesty of it that immediately children get. You know, and there is something in the DNA that allows you to do that, because no doubt although I've never met your mother or your aunt, so I suspect they're quite similar characters, you know. So
yeah.
So I think there's something, if we can only sort of transpose that sort of that DNA element, I think a massive difference for children.
Doesn't that chime with the stuff when we talked a couple of weeks ago about children missing school and the New Zealand earthquake?
Yeah.
That actually results went up because the teachers were teaching what they were interested in and what they were passionate about, rather than a set curriculum. And as a result, the results in exams rose because teachers were passionate about what they were teaching.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I know that you do regular CPD, and we'll put a link on the YouTube channel about this.
Oh.
I know that, and how many people actually attend that? How many?
A lot. So every session can hold 500 people, and they sell out. So we've raised like £12,000 for charity.
Wow.
It's been amazing. It's honestly blown my mind. I can't.
For me, Jenny, it's shown how CPD, how the lockdown and the shift to online stuff has so many benefits in so many ways. It's not negative.
So empowering. The number of parents who have been in touch with me and said, I have, you know, single mums with toddlers who have never been able to get to a weekend conference, because the conference scene's amazing, but they've never been able to access it. They've never been able to access kind of all of this amazing kind of CPD that's happening in our profession until everything went online. And that's why I started recording it and sending links out, because it means that people can watch it the next morning while they're making breakfast, or they can watch it when their kids are in bed with a glass of wine, or not watch it at all until they're ready. And I think, you know, people should also have a rest over the summer. I'm slightly concerned that I've got so many people signed up against the summer holidays.
No, well, I think Stan and I can understand why. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you this morning, Jenny. We'd love to have you back if you're keen to do a second one. I'm sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
It doesn't damage your reputation too much.
Right, cheerio, everyone.